Without further ado, let's get to this first presentation this afternoon. We're going to be joined any moment now by Dr. Robert Salmon. He is a retired associate professor from the Norwegian School of Sports Science Department of Physical Performance, who has over 50 published articles to his name. He's a current member of the International Can You Swim project team. He's also a founding member of the Life Saving Foundation and International Drowning Research Alliance. I could go on, but I will let him pick up. Robert, it is a delight for us to have you here today. I know there's a little bit of a delay on the line for us, but please bear with us. Tell us a little bit to begin with about where your passion came from for following this project.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. And I want to thank Len for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And I regret that I'm not able to be with you all in person. But yes, the passion. Well, there's no question I still have the passion, but I haven't been at this very long. So there's a lot I still don't know. I only started in 1955. But if you just have a look at the face of the baby on this opening picture. Is there any question on that first slide and on the title slide? If we can go back. Yes. Look at the face of this baby. Look at the joy this child is showing in their contact with the water and what looks like the mother holding on to her. Or him, that might have been Michael Phelps. And don't forget that Michael Phelps' 8 gold medals started at this stage. He had to start somewhere. So in a certain sense, learn to swim is the most important activity of Len and Fina and all of us, all of you who are sitting there. This is where it starts. And of course, many people involved in swimming forget that drowning prevention is the most important priority. We must never forget that. And yet many people involved in aquatics never understand it. And forgive me for saying it, I've been deeply involved in competitive swimming also, but I think some of the worst offenders are the competitive swimming people who forget that we all had to start somewhere. Well, part of my passion actually came from the fact that I failed and failed and failed and failed. It took me a long time to learn to swim, but I was highly motivated because I wasn't allowed to be in the canoe with my father until I could swim 200 meters. And later, I wasn't allowed to paddle alone until I could swim 1,500 meters. So that's where some of the passion comes from. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is obviously what we're trying to avoid. This happens all too often. According to the WHO report from 2014, there are over 320,000 confirmed, I underline confirmed, deaths by drowning annually, because, in fact, the statistics were gathered from only 85 nations of 220 some in the world who supplied data on how many deaths by drowning that country experiences. No report came from 125 nations. Experts, however, suggest that the total number of drownings is probably 3 times as many, roughly 1 million. So in fact, death by drowning competes very closely with death in traffic. Okay, next slide, please. And for many of you in the audience, this is primarily what we do. This is how we combat this terrible rate of death by drowning. One of our most important activities is to teach people to be what I like to call water competent, which is much more, as I will spend a few minutes describing for you, much more than how you use your arms and your legs. And yet, forgive me, we have some statistics from one representative organization, which happens to be the largest in the world in terms of how many people they teach, between 2 and 3 million every year. And they tell us that the average lifespan of the instructors that they train is less than 3 years. Now, of course, you can't get good at anything in 3 years. Imagine learning to play the piano. To be a concert pianist takes, maybe 50 years, like it took me to learn something about swimming. Okay, let's continue. There's a window of risk. There's a window of time at which the children and adults, of course, are most at risk. And it's from the time a child can walk, because as soon as they can walk, in a matter of a few seconds, they can get into trouble. And that window it goes until that person, that child, can swim, or it may be a teenager, or it may be an adult. And of course, what do we mean by can swim? Well, that's another presentation. We can come back to that. But I'd like to remind you that recently, when you're my age, not so recent, 10 or 15 years ago, the youngest person ever to swim across the English Channel was only 11 years old. Now, in the country of my residence, we don't expect children to be able to swim until they're 11. The end of grade 4, it's written into the national curriculum. At that point, kids should be able to swim. Well, I think that's nonsense. That's far too late. All right. Now, the next slide will show you that our responsibility is to try to close that window so that this period where we are highly at risk is reduced. We need to start earlier, and we need to reach a point where people are water competent, able to cope with a tentative threat as early as possible, so that that period where they're highly at risk, where we are highly at risk, is as short as possible. Okay. And yes, we talk about human rights, and there are several things that we consider to be human rights. And in these days of war in several parts of the world, we're all very concerned about what are human rights. And of course, preventing drowning is something that we have a right to do. So I would consider becoming water competent a human right. But let me quickly add, if it's a human right to achieve water competence, it's our moral responsibility to provide the opportunity for everyone to become water competent. Okay, now surprise me with what's on the next slide. Yes, indeed. It's easy to learn to swim. And at this point, let me just suggest that Margaret Mead, the world-famous anthropologist who did most of her work in the South Pacific in the 1920s and 1930s, before most of you were born, said this regarding the Manu people of Papua New Guinea. She said, among the people of the Manu tribe, in Papua New Guinea, it is as unusual for a 4-year-old child not to be able to swim as it is for a 4-year-old child in Europe not to be able to walk. So in fact, it is easy to learn to swim. We need certain ingredients, of course. And the ingredient that the Manu children had was simply this. They were in the water all day, every day. Their parents lived by fishing. The children had to join them. The children were on the beach. That was the place where the parents could keep one eye on the fish and one eye on the children. But Professor Murray Smith from the University of Alberta in Canada once said, it's hard to teach it to be easy. I hope that makes sense. He once said that when learners struggle to learn to swim, it's often because the way we teach actually runs counter to the way people learn. And in part, he was referring to the fact that it's a huge struggle for us to keep good teachers active. We train them, and I referred earlier to the American Red Cross, was actually the organization that teaches nearly 3 million people every year, that the average lifespan of the trained instructor is 2.67 years. Now, that's not long enough to be good at anything. Playing the piano, for example. So we have to start early. We have to offer continuous instruction. And of course, it was a baby on the opening slide that we observed. And I'm a fan of baby swimming in this sense. The earlier we start, the better. But there's considerable research that shows that baby swimming has no value whatsoever if you don't follow up. So the earlier we start, the better, but then it has to be continuous. It has to be systematic. And instruction has to be delivered by competent people. Quality instruction must be provided. And in some situations, we don't have quality instruction. So in fact, some of the Nordic countries have a situation where an offer to learn how to swim is a compulsory part of the school curriculum. But it's unfortunately not compulsory that the teachers have competence. So in the recent decade, we've talked a lot about water competence rather than simply swimming. And water competence is, of course, much more than what we do with the arms and the legs. So the next slide will show us that it involves, in fact, the affective, the emotional, attitudes, for example, and values, the affective competencies, the cognitive competencies, knowledge, especially knowledge of local risk, and judgment, and finally, the physical, the motor competencies themselves, which unfortunately many people think of as swimming. But swimming, water competence, is much bigger. It looks something like this. If we have the physical in the middle, which some people call skill, and to give us this framework, we can think of breathing as important. Of course it is. Hell, if you can't breathe, you die. In fact, Fred Lanoux in 1963 said, people don't drown because they can't swim. You'll remember Fred Lanoux, I hope. The originator of the technique that some people call drown proofing, which is the ability to float in a survival fashion, even if you're unable to swim. And that framework includes breathing. People don't drown because they can't swim, Fred Lanoux said. They drown because they can't breathe, of course. And all of these elements are integrated. So one of our responsibilities when we're teaching is to not only look at the stroking, the gliding, the floating, and the breathing, but to integrate at the same time the attitudes, the values, the judgment, and the knowledge, all of which end up in what we would like to think would be a safe behavior. In a paper published in 2017, these 15 competencies were those arrived at by studying recent research. And one of the reasons we haven't come farther than we have is that much of the research that now helps us has not been available until this recent century. But the first 10 items on this list are the physical capacities that we like to think and that research shows have protective value. And then, of course, the remaining have to do with recognizing risk, knowledge of local hazards, etc. But the first 10 are what some of you might think of as swimming. But I hope that you'll go away from this experience today thinking about water competence. Okay, what comes next? Yes, indeed. And this is a recommendation of the World Health Organization, which suggests that reducing the danger of drowning, reducing the drowning rate, requires these strategies. And most of us in this audience are especially concerned about having a national water safety plan, which in fact many nations still don't have. Some have it on paper and don't know what it means and fail to practice it. Then following this, on the next slide, is the suggestion that one of the most important interventions, and don't get me wrong, please, all of these interventions are extremely important. But some of us would like to think that one of the most important is to teach children swimming and water safety. And what I actually should have written here is water competence, which includes swimming and water safety and the other elements that we've just mentioned. Okay, so how do we develop this national strategy? Well, among other things, we have to get off our bum and get on our feet and start playing politics. In most European countries, ministries of education are in control of what is in the curriculum for the schools. And to do this properly, it can only happen in the school. It's the only place where we meet all children. So learning to swim as a school subject really has to be at the top of our priority list. And in some places it's not. And of course, in mathematics, we have goals along the way. By the time a child reaches a certain age, they should be able to do A. And when they're a little older, they should be able to do B. And when they're still a bit older, they should be able to do C, and so on. And the same thing can be said of swimming. So if we want to talk about an optimal program to get as many people as possible to reach a level of water competence where they are, to a certain degree, protected, the focus has to be on the school. Obviously, we get great help from swimming federations, from life-saving associations, from scouting organizations, from the 4-H, among others. But the school has to be at the top of the list. It's the place where we meet all children. Now, just a few thoughts about who should be teaching. And again, to repeat, in the Nordic countries, where it's compulsory for children to have the opportunity to learn to swim as part of the school curriculum, in some countries, it is not compulsory for the teacher to be competent. So I would like to suggest the following: that it should be a trained teacher who teaches swimming, not just anybody off the street. It should be a teacher who is in that particular school so that the children know the teacher and the teacher knows the children. The teacher needs to be somebody who radiates their love for the water. And according to the World Health Organization, they must be certified. Now, in the country of my residence, there are 2 organizations that train swimming teachers. And theoretically, the best way to meet this need is that these qualified teachers who know the children and who the children know, in a cooperation with swimming associations or the Life Saving Federation, train to be a swimming instructor. So we want kids to get to this level, don't we? Well, this is an exaggeration. Please notice that this young lady is out of the water, almost to her knee on the left leg, above her waist. Now, how many people can do that? My goodness. This happens to be the keeper of the United States women's Olympic water polo team. And these synchronized swimmers are demonstrating an all-around capacity. So once again, back to learn to swim. An all-around foundation has to be, in a sense, our ultimate goal. And I'm familiar with a number of countries where the definition of swimming is crawl, arm over arm. I'm deeply familiar with several countries where people think that the crawl is swimming. While, of course, as you know, historically in Europe, people think that the breaststroke is swimming. And of course, they're both wrong, because swimming, and we would prefer to think about water competence, is far more, as we've already discussed. And I hope you'll take this idea of water competence with you and push it. And we're grateful, of course, for the contribution of other organizations. But the school has to be at the top of the priority list. Now, my friends, if you'll forgive me, I'm beginning to wonder where I am, but this next slide shows me that we're at the end. So obviously there are many things I've forgotten to say. But one of our responsibilities is to show ourselves to be role models, because we ourselves also practice safety. So here I was about to go out in the canoe in this little lake that's close to my home. And yes, indeed, I have the life jacket with me. I don't forget it. Now, of course, I'm 39 years of age, and so I'm an old man, right? Like Jack Benny. When he was 80, he was asked by his assistant, "Mr. Benny, how old are you?" And when he was 80 years old, he turned to the side and he said, 39. So he pretended he was younger, and I do the same. So when people ask me how old I am, I say 39. But we need to be role models. We need not to preach, but we need to practice so that everybody can see it. And who knows, when I'm out in my canoe, I could have a heart attack. And if I fall out of the canoe, It would help to have on a life jacket. But by the way, this isn't a certified life jacket. This is what's called a paddling life jacket. I should have a proper one there in my hands. But yes, my friends, I thank you so much for your attention. If there's one thing you can take with you, I hope it is that there is a concept which we call water competence, which is more inclusive than just arms and legs and skill alone. And I hope you will push that idea. And I hope that you will reach out to as many as you can. And don't forget, it's our moral responsibility to provide this opportunity. Okay, well, now hit me hard with difficult questions. I love questions.
It up there. Dr. Robert Salmon, thank you so much for all of the wealth of information you've been able to give us there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have some questions, get those ready. We've got a hand up straight away, so if we could get a microphone over to the top right-hand corner, that would be greatly appreciated. I will just fill in the meantime and ask one of my own. I think one of the biggest messages that I took there from that was we need to get off our bums and enact change. I just wanted to ask you specifically, from your perspective, how important is language around Learn to Swim, insofar as you want to be encouraging and welcoming and warming, but we also need to ensure that people are aware of the importance, and sometimes that means really insisting about the dangers.
Exactly, and thank you for using the word dangers. Let me say this, instructions or wording, well, I've had the opportunity to teach deaf children, and I have taught and trained the teachers of deaf children, and they have to rely on sign language. So regarding language and wording, I think I would like to emphasize the following. Most of us talk too much.
Guilty.
And yeah, so, use your hands, use your body, indicate, use a kind of a swimming teacher's sign language. Use words only when you need them, and when you need to speak, 1 or 2 words is usually enough. Look at John. Look up at the ceiling. Hold your breath. Open your eyes. We don't need to say very much more. But with experience, you will learn that at certain points in time, you will, by observing the children, you will get a cue as to what you should say, if you need to say anything at all.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we are ready for the next question. So please applaud. That's all right. Thank you. Yeah, if you have the microphone and you'd like to fire in the question. Thanks for running around.
I might jump in just with a thought. There's a Zen proverb which I find most enlightening. He who sees only the goal does not see the way. And what you and I are involved in is helping children find the way so that eventually, without thinking about it, we reach several goals, actually, a goal and many goals. It's the process that counts, not the goal.
I think we're all getting a lot of profound lessons and life lesson experiences here. Thank you very much. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, Dr. Stallman. This is François Potvin from University of Lille. So maybe I'm very happy to see you on the screen because we know together. It's François. And I have a question for you. As you know, the water competence model is the most well-known in the world since you published it in 2017. In only 6 years, this model has convinced a lot of institutions to be a basis of a lot of swimming programs. I have 2 questions. What is your feeling about that, about your kind of legacy to the swimming institution? And second question, do you feel sometimes that this model is wrong interpreted? It is sometimes used in the bad way for you, or it is always used in the good way, in line with your thinking? Thanks a lot for your answer.
Well, please repeat your first question.
Okay.
At 39 years of age, my hearing is not as good as it should be.
Yes. What is your feeling to know that your model is now used all over the world to build swimming program? What is your feeling about that?
Well, of course, it makes me happy that perhaps an increasing number of people are understanding that it's not about arms and legs. It's something much bigger. So that pleases me. But of course, the concept of water competence, the phrase was actually first used by Professor Stephen Longendorfer, the editor of the International Journal of Aquatic Research and Education, in 1995. And the article we published in 2017, I was fortunate to have 3 excellent colleagues. So it's not mine. It's a concept that has grown in the last 25 or 30 years. And we've sort of tried to put a name on it, to put a focus on it, to prioritize it. And I'm pleased that people are catching on. But we also see that in many instances, it's a catchphrase. It's a couple of words that people like to say, but they haven't gotten far enough yet to understand what it really means. So we need to keep pounding with the hammer. And your second question, please.
I think you answer, because I would like to know if sometimes the water competence model is used and it's presented to argue some swimming program, and do you feel sometimes that they didn't understand the key message, the philosophical pillars of your model, or do you think now your model is well understood by the pedagogues?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think we've been able to reach out to as many people as we should. And I would also like to suggest that 2017, of course, is now 6 years ago, nearly 7. And we anticipate that new information, new research will at some point in time cause us to have a look again and maybe make some adjustments. So that the understanding of water competence is open for change. But the basic elements, I think, are here to stay. I'm convinced that pushing the idea that we need to concentrate not only on the physical aspect, but on the emotional aspects and on the cognitive, the mental aspects, the knowledge, etc.
Fantastic. And I think that's a perfect way and a perfect message for us to end on. Dr. Robert Salmon, thank you so much for your insights and your valuable knowledge today during your presentation. It's fascinating to hear, and I'm sure everybody would really like to give him a massive round of applause for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We look forward to having you back.